At 2:47 p.m. on that Friday afternoon in October, inside the $2 million chemistry lab at Fairhaven Preparatory Academy, Bryce Whitmore made the worst decision of his 17 years. He shoved his 26-year-old chemistry teacher, Indira Castellanos, into the chemical storage cabinet with such force that a bottle of concentrated sulfuric acid toppled from the top shelf, shattering just 2 inches from her head. What Bryce didn't know was that he had just assaulted a woman who had survived 3 suicide bombings in Kabul, who had pulled 47 Afghan children from a burning school with her bare hands while shrapnel tore through her left shoulder, who had earned a Bronze Star with Valor for extraordinary heroism under enemy fire. Indira Castellanos wasn't just the quiet chemistry teacher who wore oversized cardigans. She was a former Army intelligence officer with 8 years of combat experience. The bottle's impact sent droplets of acid spraying across the floor. In that moment, Indira's muscle memory from 8 years of military training took control. Her left hand shot out with surgical precision, deflecting the falling bottle away from the cluster of students. Her right hand found Bryce's wrist in a grip technique she'd learned at Fort Bragg. The pivot came next. Using his own momentum against him, Bryce Whitmore, star wrestler at 195 pounds of pure muscle, flew through the air and landed flat on his back with an impact that knocked every molecule of oxygen from his lungs. The entire sequence took 2.3 seconds. Harper Monroe, sitting in the third row with her phone hidden in her pencil case, has been secretly recording everything for the past 3 months. She'd been documenting Bryce's behavior ever since her younger sister Sage had attempted suicide last year after Bryce leaked doctored photos of her across social media. 6 weeks earlier, Indira had stood in front of her bathroom mirror in her $600 a month studio apartment, carefully buttoning an oversized cardigan chosen to hide the network of scars that mapped her body like a twisted road atlas of war. This was her first year teaching after her medical discharge from the Army she'd chosen. Fairhaven Prep because they were desperate. The previous chemistry teacher had quit mid-semester after classroom management. Challenges with Bryce Whitmore. The morning she first walked through Fairhaven's doors, Stellan Reeves was mopping the main hallway. At 62, with faded Navy tattoos and a sealed trident pin hidden in his wallet, Stellan recognized another warrior the moment Indira entered. Afghanistan or Iraq? He'd asked quietly. Both. You. Somalia, 93, Mogadishu. They never spoke about it again. But every morning after that, Stellan left an extra cup of coffee in the teacher's lounge. Bryce Whitmore had strutted into her classroom on that first day like he owned it, which technically his family did. His father, Mitchell Whitmore, owned the largest law firm in 3 counties. The Whitmore name was carved into half the buildings in Fairhaven. "You must be the new chemistry teacher," Bryce had announced. "Hope you last longer than the last one." But Harper Monroe hadn't laughed. She'd sat in the back corner, her phone carefully positioned, recording everything. For 3 months, she'd been building a case against Bryce, documenting every cruel comment, every accident. Her sister Sage was still in therapy, still unable to return to Fairhaven, where Bryce's presence poisoned every hallway. The first sign of trouble came in week 2, when Bryce accidentally knocked over a beaker of sodium hydroxide solution. Indira had simply grabbed the bottle of acetic acid and neutralized the spill in 4 seconds flat. "Careful, Bryce," she'd said calmly. "Chemical accidents can have permanent consequences." Week 3 brought the toxic fumes incident. Bryce and his teammates stayed after class. And when Indira leaned over to check their setup, Bryce mixed ammonia with bleach, creating chloramine vapor. Indira grabbed the boys by their collars and yanked them backward. "Everyone out. Move now." The entire class fled, including Bryce, who was laughing as he ran. That evening, Indira sat in Principal Garrett Holbrook's office. "Boys will be boys," Miss Castellanos Holbrook said. "The Whitmores have been generous supporters for 3 generations. A student deliberately created toxic gas in my classroom," Indira responded. "That's attempted assault with a chemical weapon." Holbrook's face flushed. "That's a very serious accusation. Do you have any proof?" "I have 23 witnesses and multiple angles of video footage." Indira left knowing Holbrook would do nothing. That night, she installed a discreet camera in her classroom. Ohio was a one-party consent state, meaning she could legally document everything. The cyberbullying campaign started 3 days later. An Instagram account called Fairhaven Truth began posting edited videos making Indira appear incompetent. Snapchat stories spread rumors she was inappropriate with male students, that she'd been discharged from the military for mental instability. October 15th marked the escalation to physical intimidation. Bryce started arriving late every day, slamming the door, knocking books off desks. "Sorry, Miss C," he'd say. "Wrestling practice ran over? Coach says, I need to work on my takedowns. Want me to demonstrate?" But Indira had survived worse psychological operations in Afghanistan. October 18th brought assault with chemical weapon attempt 1. Bryce and his crew lingered after class. When Indira leaned over to examine their setup, Bryce knocked over concentrated ammonia. His hand also knocked over bleach. The chemicals mixed to create chloramine gas in dangerous concentrations. In less than 2 seconds, Indira had grabbed the boys and physically thrown them toward the door. "Evacuation protocol? Now. Everyone out." Stellan appeared within moments. "Saw the whole thing through the door window?" he announced loudly. "That boy deliberately mixed those chemicals. That's attempted murder in my book." Bryce spun around. "Nobody asked you, janitor." Stellan smiled. "Been mopping floors for 5 years? Boy. Amazing what people say when they think you're just part of the furniture." October 25th arrived with crisp autumn air. Bryce entered the classroom 12 minutes late, slamming the door. "Sorry I'm late. Miss C had to deal with some family business. My dad's suing another teacher." The threat wasn't subtle. "Take your seat, Bryce," Indira said calmly. "Make me," Bryce responded. Bryce began his approach, knocking equipment off lab benches. "You know what your problem is, Miss C? You think because you played soldier, you're tough. Real students don't destroy property their parents donated," Indira responded. "Property my family paid for," Bryce countered, sweeping chemical bottles off the table, "which means I can do whatever I want with it." As he reached past Indira, his left hand grabbed her shoulder to spin her around, but his right hand groped her chest as he shoved her backward toward the chemical storage cabinet. "Dude, too far," Connor Murphy said. "Shut up," Bryce roared, shoving Indira harder. The sulfuric acid bottle toppled forward. Time fractured into milliseconds. Indira's left hand deflected the bottle into the safety sink. Her right hand found Bryce's wrist in a joint lock. The pivot came next. Bryce flew through the air and hit the floor with an impact that drove every atom of air from his lungs. "Holy shit!" Someone screamed. Harper stood up. "I got it all. The groping, the assault, the self-defense, everything." Indira knelt beside Bryce, checking his airway and breathing. "Connor, call 911. Tell them we need paramedics and police for a sexual assault incident. Briggs, get Principal Holbrook immediately. Harper, save that video to multiple cloud services right now." Stellan burst through the door. "I saw everything through the door window," he announced loudly. "That boy sexually assaulted and physically attacked a teacher. She defended herself with minimum necessary force." Mitchell Whitmore arrived in his $100,000 Mercedes, storming into the school. "I want that woman arrested immediately for assaulting my son," he bellowed. Detective Amara Rodriguez didn't even look up from the phone screen. "Sir, your son committed sexual battery and assault? The teacher used reasonable force in self-defense." That's when Lysander Volkov arrived, press credentials hanging from his neck. "Mr. Whitmore," he called out, "care to comment on the 7 other students who filed complaints about your son over the past 3 years?" "No comment," Mitchell said curtly. "Actually, you're not," Detective Rodriguez interjected. "Bryce is under arrest for sexual assault, battery, and destruction of property." That evening, someone leaked Indira's military service record to the media. Within hours, every major news outlet had the story. Army intelligence officer. Bronze Star with valor for saving 47 children. Purple Heart recipient. The comment sections exploded with outrage. The school board called an emergency meeting. Judge Cordelia Whitmore, Mitchell's older sister, stood up. "I need to recuse myself from any legal proceedings involving my nephew." However, As a citizen and an aunt who's watched Bryce's behavior escalate for years while my brother enabled it, I must speak. What I saw in those videos wasn't a child making a mistake. It was a predator who'd been taught that consequences don't apply to him. District Attorney Brian E. Salazar stood up next. The DA's office will be filing the following charges against Bryce Whitmore: sexual battery, assault and battery, destruction of property exceeding $50,000, and making terroristic threats through cyber harassment. Furthermore, we're opening an investigation into Principal Hellbrook. The next morning, Connor Murphy approached Indira with a flash drive. I recorded everything, he admitted. Every plan Bryce made, every person he targeted, every teacher he drove out. The flash drive contained 3 years of videos, messages, and recorded conversations. Harper Monroe told her complete story with Sage beside her. The deep-fake photos weren't just cruel pranks. They were part of a pattern that had driven 4 girls to transfer schools and 1 to attempt suicide. Stellan presented his own evidence, a notebook he'd kept for 5 years documenting every incident. I'm ex-Navy, but I'm also an ex-felon, he admitted. Figured my word wouldn't mean much, but I kept records anyway. 3 weeks later, the trial began. When Indira took the stand, she wore her dress uniform, every medal on display. I faced enemies who wanted me dead for the crime of being American, she testified. They at least had the courage to face me directly. Bryce Whitmore attacked people he saw as weak. That's not strength. That's the very definition of cowardice. Sage Monroe's testimony devastated the defense. He didn't just share fake pictures, Sage said. He created a narrative that I was worthless. He tried to erase who I really was. The verdict came back in less than 2 hours, guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Bryce to 3 to 5 years in prison, mandatory registration as a sex offender, and $2 million in restitution. Mitchell Whitmore's law firm collapsed within months. Principal Holbrook accepted a plea deal, 18 months, in prison and permanent revocation of his education credentials. 6 months after the trial, Indira received a letter from Bryce. I'm in therapy here. Real therapy, it began. You showed me what real strength looks like. Real strength protects others. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that your lesson finally got through. She kept the letter but didn't respond. Connor Murphy started an anti-bullying organization. Harper Monroe won a full scholarship to film school. Sage became a peer counselor. Indira's law passed in the state legislature, requiring schools to maintain independent reporting systems. 1 year later, Indira stood in the same chemistry lab, teaching the same class. A new student pointed to the Purple Heart pin on her cardigan. Missy, why do you wear that pin? Indira smiled. It's a reminder that surviving isn't about being the strongest person in the room. It's about protecting people who can't protect themselves. As students filed out, Indira found a note tucked under her keyboard, written in 23 different hands. Miss C, you saved more than just our lives that day. You saved our faith that good people can win against bad systems. Thank you for being our hero. She folded the note carefully, placing it in her desk drawer next to Bryce's letter, next to the commendations from Afghanistan, next to the photos of the children she'd saved. Each piece represented a moment when she'd chosen to act despite the cost. Outside, Stellan was trimming the hedges. As Indira walked past, he offered a slight salute. She returned it, understanding that they were both soldiers who'd found peace through the knowledge that they'd stood watch when it mattered, that they'd protected those who needed protecting, that they'd proven evil only wins when good people do nothing.